Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis. I am your host. It's great to be with you here today. Today on the episode, we're going to be doing a live review. Actually, pretty unscripted. I have no notes. We're going to be watching a conversation between LeCrae and Matt Chandler. I was hoping this might give you some insight into how I think and process these things. Who knows how this will go? Some of it may be good, some of it bad. Maybe I'm going to miss some stuff. There's other people that have talked about it, but I thought I'd offer my take, and I'll explain that in a second. Before we get into that, I wanted to make sure you knew about a product I enjoy called Ion Layer. Ion Layer is a way to get NAD infusions at home. You may have heard of these as they become pretty popular in the last few years, but NAD is critical for mitochondrial function. It can help you recover after workout, energy production. But as you get older, those NAD levels decline. By the time you're 50, those NAD levels are 50% of what they used to be in your 20s. And so a lot of people have been checking out going to treatment centers to get IV NAD plus treatments. But Ion Layer is a company that offers these effective treatments as an alternative with patches. These patches have been used in the medical field for decades by those who can't tolerate IVs. And now you can reap the benefits of NAD plus with these patches. It has a 14-hour time window, so you don't get the sick feeling that you get with an IV sometimes. And each kit comes with 6 500 milligram doses of NAD plus for a total of 3,000 milligrams per kit, which means you essentially get 6 treatments for the price of one IV treatment, which is a great deal. So they have a team of doctors that handle the whole thing for you. You sign up today, 5 to 7 days later, you will get your kit at your door. And so if you want to do this, get this NAD treatment for a fraction of the cost of an IV treatment, which is typically thousands of dollars, head over to ionlayer.com, use the code FPT, standing for Foolproof Theology, FPT, get $100 off your first kit. It comes with a 30-day, 100% money-back guarantee, so it's really a no-brainer if you're looking to enhance your life in this way. Maybe you work out a lot, looking to recover, increase your energy, all that good stuff. Head to ionlayer.com, use code FPT, get $100 off your first kit. All right, but let's get into today's episode. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about a conversation between LeCrae and Matt Chandler. So I wanted to give a kind of like disclosure before I begin showing the video and then talking about the video. And you know, I don't know if either of these guys knows who I am. I mean, I think Chandler's met me twice, but I grew up in Dallas. Many of you who listen probably know this already. And so LeCrae was up in Dallas. He was up at Tommy Nelson's church, Denton Bible Church, for a little bit, and Denton. And he was there for a while, and they get into this in the episode, so we're going to probably talk about this. I was in high school when Matt Chandler took over Highland Village Church. He didn't actually plant a church. He took over a Baptist church in Highland Village, Texas, and it renamed it The Village. I visited a couple times in high school. So both of these guys were in my orbit. They had been in my orbit from the time I was, 17, up until now. I mean, I've known about them. LeCrae, if you didn't know, he's been pretty open on matters of left-wing causes. He's out there performed for Raphael Warnock, taking pictures with Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, obviously marched in the BLM marches and that kind of thing. I don't think he attends church anymore. He was famous back in the day, especially in my circles, for the music he put out, for being, you know, reformed and that kind of thing. And, you know, I just don't really listen to him much anymore. Matt Chandler, obviously, you know, very famous evangelical pastor in America, chairman of the board for Acts 29. And he has a famous video, you know, Jesus wants the rose, and some other famous clips. You're not David. These are famous Matt Chandler isms. And he's the pastor, senior pastor of the Village Church down in Texas. So it's a mega church now. And we'll just get into some of the content they talk about. So let's see if I can get this pulled up here. Let's do this.
That time period, y'all were like young rock star preachers, so to speak, but you were doing it effective. Now, in hindsight, right, there are people who've fallen or people who've made bad decisions, people who've lost their lives. Do you think that having that kind of influence and wielding that power could contribute to those types of things?
I mean, I think that's a phenomenal question. Those brothers were friends.
Yeah.
There was a season, Craig, where I was like, does anyone make it?
Yeah.
Like, does anybody get to the other side of this?
Yeah.
Christian leaders can start feeling trapped. And some people who listen to this probably aren't going to appreciate this, but it's fun. I mean, I've been in the game long enough to tell you this is what happens.
Yeah. Churches in leadership is because of the megachurch model.
And I think there are some unique opportunities for the enemy to work in a model like that. But I don't know if I want to say that those opportunities aren't at the smaller church.
When you said it's not about blue check celebrity Christians, that triggered me a little bit, because why do you think it is difficult for Christian leaders, pastors, to walk in that type of vulnerability?
Well, I think
This is The Deep End with LeCrae.
It's just a wild intro. I don't know where this is going to go.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the deep end. Who we have today? There's so many ways you could introduce this person. I mean, you could be like, oh man, this author who's written these books, this global leader, this. But we've known each other for a while, and I don't talk about this much because it's funny, because I was thinking about it as I knew you were coming, and I was like, when did I find out about Matt Chandler? And I found out about you. I guess y'all came from Abilene to Dallas.
Yep.
And I was at a church in Denton, Texas.
That's right.
College ministry up there. And the leadership up there was like, y'all stay away from this ministry called Village.
Sounded culty.
They're doing some kooky things down there. And I was like, oh, I gotta go check this out for myself. So
It's actually a great segue to talk about this, because at Denton Bible, they had something called the Young Guns. A lot of people I knew from college and other places have gone through a program, basically discipleship with the lead pastor named Tommy Nelson. He famously, and I don't know if it's 2016 or 2020, but he came out like full bore on like a Sunday night service in support of Trump. I mean, he laid out the issues, but man, he was seeing things. That's how a lot of these guys are. You know, they may be older and say things in a way that is less polished or academic, but he was seeing things before they were happening, and he wasn't afraid to say it that way. And so him telling LeCrae, whether it was him or somebody else, telling LeCrae, don't go, you know, sometimes we should listen to people even if we don't want to. And I've been guilty of that too. People will say, oh, you shouldn't do that, and then I want to do it. So sounds like LeCrae didn't care. I always find it fascinating that Chandler's the president of a church planning, or not, he's not the president, he actually misspoke, the chairman of the board of a church planning network. And I'm second guessing myself. Is he the president? What is he listed as on the Acts 29 website? Anyways, he's like on the board of this church planning organization, and he's never planted a church. So, do with that what you will. But it's kind of wild. It's pretty wild. I mean, our church plant, this isn't to brag on us particularly at all. It's more just to highlight the distinction is that we moved to Boulder knowing no one here. I knew one couple from college, but they weren't part of our church or anything. And, we had a core team of like 10, 15 that moved to Boulder. So it's called a parachute plant when you do that. Yeah, Chandler's the executive chairman. Howard's the president. Anyways, it's just a very different model when you do what Chandler did, which is take over an existing church and you bring in like a bunch of college young professionals and infuse it with a new life. It's basically a replant, which has its total value. It's good. It's a good thing to do, but just odd. So here we go.
We had just got married and we went to go visit, and we were like, this is phenomenal.
Come on, man.
And in the 6 months that we were transitioning from Dallas to and man, it was an incredible time. You were engaging, you were funny, you told a lot of jokes. It was like, I was like, he's talking like a regular person. And I hadn't heard that before. Yeah. It felt like you were speaking at a very common folk level, but you were talking about some heady things. And I'm curious, has that always been your demeanor? Were you like, hey, I can talk about anything, but I'm also like a researcher, a thinker? Like, what is it?
I think it was, I had to go on my own journey there, because when you're when you're a preacher, you're actually entering into this long lineage of rhetorical skill plus spiritual power and it took me a while to find my way.
Okay.
My heroes in preaching weren't like me. And so preaching for me, I felt really like an orphan for a long time, but I can track back to after I became a Christian. Yeah. I was living outside of Houston, down by Galveston Bay, and on 105.7 AM radio from 9 to 10. Chuck Swindoll was on from 9 to 9:30. Yeah. And Dr. Tony Evans was on from 9:30 to 10.
Oh yeah.
And then what I think what I was picking up in that moment was both men's commitment to the text.
Yeah.
And then more so Evans's ability to weave illustrations in that helped me as a new Christian understand it. And so for me, even in preparation now, like I'll preach the last chapter of Jonah this coming Friday, like even as I was working on that sermon yesterday, I could see some things because of my education and my 30 years of following with Jesus,
Yeah.
that the wrestle in putting the sermon together was, how can I help someone understand this that doesn't have my 30 years in the game now?
Yeah.
How can I? And so that, it kind of just comes up out of how I am. I think I'm a simple man. I've been given a good mind by the Lord, but to me, simplicity changes everything. If you make it too complex and there's no application, okay, what does that mean? Then people might think I was funny, but they're not leaving with anything that I want them to leave with.
Yeah.
And so that's been kind of, as I've developed as a preacher over the last 30 years, I've tried to be careful of not moving off that mark, of not aiming at the lowest common denominator. That would be a mistake. But how do I make complex things simple?
Yeah.
And a lot of times you can do that with illustrations. Most of the time you do that with application.
Yeah.
But I don't think God's hiding from us in his word. And so let me just try to point out what's really clear here. And then I try to stay away from things like, well, this text, it can mean these 7. There were ways that, in fact, one of the reasons I moved to the ESV away from the New American Standard is I was preaching through the book of Hebrews, maybe around the time you were showing up. And so often the NAS was so close to the Greek that I was having to stop and go, let me tell you what's going on here. And then it felt like I was undermining people's understanding of reading the Bible and understanding it. So the more I have to say, this is what's going on in the Greek, the more I'm telling people who can't read or handle Greek, you couldn't understand this without me. And so I want to shrink back. Plus, nobody cares. Nobody cares what this Greek word means. I know maybe some...
You feel good about it.
In the Greek, it means... Let me tell you how smart I am. Isn't the win for my 45, 50 minutes on the stage.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what he's saying here. Obviously, that you could read and hear this very cynically. I just want to highlight a few things. I mean, obviously Chandler has a heart to reach people. He wants to minister to the kind of common man, the simple person, and that's in line with many people who have come before him. Chandler hasn't, to my knowledge, he might have done a program at Wheaton. I'm not sure with Ed Stetzer, but to my knowledge, he's constantly brought up that he hasn't been to seminary in the past. And so, one of the problems with somebody who's rhetorically gifted like Chandler, and you can go listen to my conversation with Clifford Humphrey on this topic, many preachers view themselves as kind of rhetorical, masters or communication experts. And by all means, pastors and preachers should be good at communication, but you hear them often, denigrate these bigger concepts, these, they talk about the Greek and kind of make fun of that. And it's like, no, like that matters. Many of us were bought into the ESV less because of the Greek. He doesn't really know. I mean, he probably has Logos Bible software so he can see the Greek. I don't know if he's taken Greek before. I would assume he hasn't. That's not necessarily a mark. But the ESV was a marketing campaign by Crossway, and it was lauded by all the big names: Tabidi and Abuele, also known as Ron Burns, Tim Keller. And so anyone who was involved in the Young Restless Reform very, very quickly picked up on, this tribe that I'm now part of, we all read the ESV. And so it has more to do with that than it has to do with anything else. And for Chandler, it seems like, his big thing is, if things are too complicated for, I guess, him, and by him, he also means the people he tries to preach to, then he wants to steer clear of it. I understand what he's saying. It's not that I don't sympathize with that point of view, but it leads to some real big problems because your limit as a preacher is often capped by either your familiarity with theological controversies in church history itself, the languages, all that kind of stuff. And I had one preaching professor say, if there's a mist in the pulpit, there's a fog in the pews. And so the maturity of the church will often be capped by the pastor's or preacher's ability to understand complex things. And one of the challenges we have in evangelicalism is we have a lot of rhetorically gifted communicators that people assume are experts, who really are not that familiar with some bigger topics. They can be useful. I'm not somebody who's a credentialist when it comes to being a pastor. However, I do think a seminary education from a good seminary, not a bad one, is maybe not a requirement, but it's a huge asset, and it helps your church grow. Our church has been a big fan of their pastors continuing to improve in their intellectual journey. And so just wanted to offer that because a lot of times people read his books or whatever. I remember reading his book years ago about the gospel. And I was kind of like, meh, like, yeah, but a lot of people love it. They're like, ate it up. Oh, this is the best. Isn't the best? And I'm like, all these guys like Chandler, Francis Chan, David Platt is a little bit more educated. It just seems more like word games. They're trying to communicate these deep ideas in simple ways, and it's like there's a lot of mistakes made when we do that. So let's keep on.
That's interesting. I wonder, do you know, because at that time period, and I don't even know if, I mean, there were like a group of y'all were like young rock star preachers, so to speak. It was like just a handful of these communicators. Some of y'all are in cities like Seattle or St. Louis or just random places, but you're in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And so you're talking the same talk that someone in New York or Seattle or LA is talking in the Bible Belt. And I felt like it was gaining attention because it was like, whoa, you're shaking stuff up.
Yeah.
But you also weren't following the status quo of like just those kind of, rigid. Was that intentional, or was that just your natural?
Well, I think there was a move of God in that day.
Okay.
That was, I think, pretty special.
Yeah.
And the Lord was moving his church, I would argue contextually, for the day that we're in.
Okay.
And I got, by the grace of God, to be one of those pioneers.
Yeah.
What's funny is the conversation I was having with some of those guys back then. Some of those guys were in New York, some guys were in Seattle, other guys like St. Louis. The question was, who has a more difficult job? Them in really secular environments or me in the Bible Belt? And I always argued I had the tougher task.
Really?
Well, I had to help people understand that they're not Christians before they could become Christians.
Talk about that.
Well, these are real stories from the village where I had a guy once that told me he had come up front. I was praying with him after a service. He was having some pretty significant marital issues. And so I just start asking questions. And in the way he was answering questions, I realized, oh man, I don't think this guy's a Christian. So I just asked him, hey, are you a Christian? And he said, no, absolutely, my whole life. And I was like, well, tell me about it. When did you become a Christian? And his answer was, I grew up in San Antonio.
Man,
like his answer to,
I'm from Texas.
I'm a Christian. I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
I was born in San Antonio. My parents went to church.
Yeah.
And so then I'm asking follow-up questions, right? Of, well, did you talk to me about, was there a moment or was it over a period of time? And he's like, no, I was born a Christian. I've always been a Christian. Never, not an hour in my life where I came out the womb loving Jesus. And then, so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is an issue. And there were all these baptism testimonies of the.
I mean, this is a really important topic, and it's being really handled, I think, sloppily in terms of the differences between Paedo-Baptist and Credo-Baptist. I totally get. I'm from Dallas. I understand what he's talking about. He's talking about cultural Christianity. These people that would say they're Christ, but really don't follow him in their life. And I understand that problem. And guys like Chandler run with a crowd like Russell Moore and Ray Ortlund who denigrate Christian culture. They really hate Bible Belt Christianity. They want to see it gone. And so like I've been in Boulder for 14 years. I know what's on the other side of Bible Belt Christianity, and it's pagan nationalism. And we can denigrate that if you want. I just don't think it's the right move. And I, ministering in a secular context, very secular context, one of the most liberal cities in America, I would obviously take issue with him saying it's harder. I don't even know if that's a useful thing. Each context is different. I mean, Pakistan is going to be harder or something. That each one has its own challenges. It's a real challenge there, but even the way he's talking about it is very revivalistic, which is very evangelical of him. Kind of goes into Bebbington's quadrilateral about revivalism and conversionism being very important to the evangelical mind. When in fact, this guy who says he grew up a Christian, all this kind of stuff, there's a different way to pastor that type of person that is often overlooked in these contexts. So I just wanted to highlight that real quick.
These 20-something young men and women who would get in our waters and they would testify that they grew up in church, that they had been baptized when they were young, oftentimes because mom and dad, with a lot of well-meaning desire for their children, would frame it like, do you want to come to heaven with mom and dad, or do you want to go to hell forever? Well, I know a lot of 7-year-olds. I don't know a lot of 7-year-olds who are going to go, give me hell forever.
Right.
And so there wasn't really a personal encounter with the Lord that led to them surrendering as much as they could understand it as a 7 or 8-year-old. I mean, gosh, Lauren got saved, my wife, at 7. And she's just had an ever-increasing growth in her love for Jesus. Even though I'm not trying to make it sound like her life has been all up and to the right. She married me. There's some valleys in there. But they would get in the water and talk about leaving the church, usually because they ran out of gas.
Yeah.
They just ran out of gas on it, man. They just couldn't be good enough. They kept struggling. They were in an environment where it wasn't okay to not be okay. They were, and this is that old school fundamentalism, right?
Yeah.
And then they'd come to the village. They had heard the grace of God. They had an encounter with Jesus. And now they were saying yes to Jesus, all of life for all of life.
Yeah.
And so I was taking all this stuff in and I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody thinks they're a Christian here. But that doesn't mean for them to have a personal relationship with Jesus. That doesn't mean for them that they have any intention of submitting to his lordship in their life, in any area of their life. It just means that there's a Bible verse in their bio.
Yeah.
It just means that they occasionally come to church. And most often it means they're a moral conservative. But it doesn't mean they love the Lord. And so I just decided I'm going to just start chipping away at that. And that those waves of God's really special grace on the village church has come when I've pressed against that. Now, what's interesting is I don't think it's the same here in 2024. I don't think that residue
Yeah.
of, everybody's Christian, I'm a Christian, of course I'm a
Right.
Christian, is as prevalent
Yeah.
as it was
Back in that
22 years ago.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you've been trying to chip away at it. That's the mind trip, is that if we are effective in discipling cultures, nations, peoples, individuals, and corporately, there will be people who come along who are nominal, who just kind of go to the latest big thing in town, and the moral norms of a society, we would hope, would be shaped by Christianity. So rather than denigrating and trying to chip away, how do you still educate people on, like, yeah, you need to delight yourself in the Lord, you need to walk with Christ, you need to obey his commandments. Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. I don't think we have to do that in a way, and I would suggest I'm not saying Chandler has this, but many of his pals have this deep-seated resentment against these so-called moral conservatives or cultural Christians. They hate it so much, and it's really sad, because on the one hand, now that he's going to talk about, it's different now, and it's like, yeah, because you wanted it to be different now. You eroded and dumped on the religious right. You punched right, called a left, all this kind of stuff, and so I don't know. Let's see what he says about that.
For sure. I wonder too. I mean, it's interesting that you were pushing up against something completely different, but you were doing it effectively, right? Yeah. Like, God was using you tremendously in that capacity. It was happening with the church planting network that you were part of in multiple different cities.
Yes, absolutely was.
And, for me, I can't speak for everybody else. For me, it felt like the Detroit Pistons of the 90s or something. It was like the bad boys of, Protestantism. And it was like, oh, I love this. It was like it was like a little obnoxious, but
Certainly.
but like aggressive, but it was calling men to be men.
Yeah.
And it was like this thing where a lot of people just flocked toward it and said, oh, I want to be a part of this. I need to be a part of this. And I grew tremendously because of that church planting network.
Yeah.
I mean, in some senses, I was recruited and I was like, yo, bro, I'm not trying to be a pastor.
Yeah.
I promise you, I'm not trying to be a pastor. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I appreciate it, but I'm not. For you in that season, because now in hindsight, right, there are people who've fallen or people who've made bad decisions, people who've lost their lives.
Yeah.
Is that just the natural propensity of humanity? Or do you think that having that kind of influence and wielding that power could contribute to those types of things?
I mean, I think that's a phenomenal question. I've given a ton of thought to this because
It was not a phenomenal question. It was very complicated and not clear what he's trying to get after, but let's see how he tries to figure this
for some
question
people,
out.
the guys that you're referencing are podcasts, but those brothers were friends.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I kind of think about that season maybe differently than others.
Yeah.
I just think that if you're unwilling to lean into those deeper wounds and let the Holy Spirit minister and work in those places, and you do ministry out of a place of brokenness. And I think you can be doing ministry out of a place of brokenness if you're doing the work to address that, because we're all fallen creatures. And what's funny is all the guys you're referencing, we almost all have the same backstory. None of us grew up in homes where dad was kind of scratching our backs and telling us we were good men. And we all were like, we all wanted to win, to show dad he was wrong. And to prove something to the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we brought that's where that swagger was coming from.
Okay. Yeah.
And where guys were able to deal with that, they've made it through, and where guys didn't, well, it kind of blew up in their faces.
This is a great, great topic, because this is the narrative that's behind the scenes in a lot of Acts 29 that I heard over and over again. And you'll notice, like, the way he talks about ministry, the way he talks about men, is very inconsistent with, pre-20th century visions of how the pastor grows or who the pastor is. It's not like we're the first generation ever come along that struggled with honoring and respecting our fathers. And I think for most guys, it wasn't, we need to press into those wounds and, get in a room with a counselor and use all this therapeutic language. We just need to be told, you should respect your father. And I would suggest, some of these guys, were raised not in a Christian home, but some of them were, and they just were taught, you have a deep father wound. You need to, your father wasn't, I don't know why, scratching his back, and you're a good man. That's his vision of being a good father. I mean, that I try to encourage my sons and all that, but it's a very strange kind of like mind trap they get into with this talk of father wounds. And I think there's some legitimacy to that stuff, but I think at the end of the day, the application is respect your father. Even if he wasn't great, if he didn't do the best job he could have, respect your father. And so that would have been more helpful than a lot of this therapeutic language. But let's see what he keeps saying.
In all sorts of different terrible ways. And that's why I think like or not just leaders, maybe especially leaders, there is a responsibility, I think, that we bear. That's not a fun responsibility, to make sure what we're cultivating in our hearts is moving towards a vision God's given us and not from a past or a background where we're trying to validate us.
Yeah.
And what's hard about that, especially now that I'm a 50-year-old man, is I couldn't have heard that at 28. I wouldn't be able to hear it. But like if some older, wiser man would have pulled me aside and said, hey, now listen, here's some things I'm seeing that I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure it happened. But what I was seeing at the time is thousands of people come to know Jesus. I was watching people get set free from addiction. I mean, the TDC was grimy in those early years, man. We found a guy in our bathroom with a heroin needle in his arm. And we found, I mean, it was wildness. And Jesus was, I mean, so I'm part of this, like nonstop, running 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Tons of people coming to know Jesus. And so are my friends.
Yeah.
And we're like caught up in something. That's what it felt like. And so I needed to get punched in the mouth a couple of times by the Holy Spirit. I needed it to, here's the language I needed it to stop working. And by not working, I mean, not like we're not growing, we're not seeing people come to Jesus, God inflexing.
Yeah.
I needed it to stop scratching that itch of brokenness in me. And that's what happened to me when I was probably late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
I started feeling thin. And easily agitated and frustrated, and it just wasn't working. I don't have better language than that. Like it wasn't tied to any number. It wasn't tied to sex. It wasn't tied to money. It wasn't tied to. I just was angsty, unsatisfied, frustrated at everything. And by the grace of God, I had seen enough guys step on landmines that I thought. I mean, there was a season, Craig, where I was like, "Does anyone make it?
Yeah.
Like, does anybody get to the other side of this?"
Yeah.
And I had some significant fear that I would do the same, and I was nervous about bringing reproach on the name of Jesus. And so in that season, another good friend stepped on a landmine, and I was like, I'm finding help.
Wow.
I don't know if this thing, and I had this moment where I'm in my office with a guy, and he is, I mean, tears and snot, just a really hard situation.
Yeah.
And this man is like falling to pieces in my office. And I caught myself thinking in my head, I need to connect him to recovery. I need to get him with Jason Holloman. I need to get him over here. Like, I'm not in the room at all, bro. I am not mourning with those who mourn. I am not rejoicing with those who rejoice. I'm running a play.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, Lord, I don't want to be this guy. I want to be the guy that's heartbroken with him.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what you would be. That's who you would be.
Absolutely.
And so that sent me on a journey of getting some help.
Yeah.
I needed someone who could help me navigate the places in my heart I was unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
And so I went to an intensive and got some help, and and then reworked kind of how I was doing my closest friend group, and just to create some more accountability, create some things that I felt like I needed more than I had.
Why do you?
The way it's just interesting. I mean, like, on the one hand, I can resonate with a lot of what he's saying. And I think a lot of pastors can. And I think there can be usefulness to exploring, that there's the typical story of the youth pastor who plants a church out of angst because he's like, I'm going to plant a church that's not like that church I was a youth pastor at. So, like, I get that. I get the whole, like, trying to prove yourself. But the way we conceive of the office of the pastorate and the masculine kind of energy, achievement, go, all that kind of stuff, instead of like embracing that, it's often denigrated, it's often diminished. And instead of reorienting it towards God's word or understanding kind of a holistic vision of ministry, it's often the places people go are to counseling, therapy. And that's always going to go straight to, what did your dad do to you, or where are you feeling that they were insufficient, and how are you trying to prove yourself? I mean, when I was in seminary, I had this, as an older, wiser guy, was like, you seem to have a lot of angst with your father. And I was like, yeah, I mean, what do you want me to do with that? What they want you to do is like get into therapy. And it's like, what you should have done is like, you need to get over it and forgive your father and respect him and move on with your life. Like, you need to be thankful for your parents rather than that. One book on this is a great book, How to Be Free from Bitterness by Jim Wilson. Been very helpful for me in wrestling with these things. But man, like, I sense what he's saying in Acts 29. There's a lot of, angst and angry dudes who are trying to prove something that should have been channeled into pursuing excellence together, not retreating into kind of this feminine framework of getting in touch with your feelings.
Think as you're talking about that, because I've stepped on like 7 landmines.
Oh yeah, me too.
But why do you think? And this is interesting to me as you're talking about a lot of this. I never considered that maybe I wouldn't have listened to someone older, wiser during that season of my life when everything was just working. But as I've gotten older and I've become more broken, I'm comfortable being vulnerable. Yeah, I'm comfortable owning my mistakes and owning where I fell short.
Listen to how they talk. It's as I become older, become more broken, become more vulnerable. What is this language? What is it? Do we see Paul writing this way? Do we see pastors in church history this talking this way? This is a conception of ministry and a sense of self that is relatively novel in our day and foreign to prior context. And so it sends a bunch of alarm bells in my mind because I'm going, I don't, this brokenness, this vulnerability, all this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, like we talked this weekend at Burn the Ships about, and I told Matt this, there's a talk he gave on godly ambition, pursuing great things, achieving great things. And I told Matt last week, if I was in my early 20s, I probably would have been able to hear this that well. So make sure you're, you're reaching those guys that were like me. I think the one thing he said was like, if you want to develop a godly brotherhood, you need to have something to offer. You need to bring something to the table. And that to a pietist, that to a kind of a normie evangelical sounds repugnant, because you immediately get in the mindset of like, well, what did I offer to God? And you interpret it soteriologically. But all we're trying to do is encourage men to be great men and think about how they have friendships. But stuff like this doesn't actually help. It actually diminishes manhood. It diminishes godly ambition. And it does so in a really sinister way. So that's why I view it as so dangerous.
Sure. Why do you think it is difficult for Christian leaders, pastors, to walk in that type of vulnerability?
Yeah. Well, I think that Christian leaders can start feeling trapped. And what I mean by that, and some people who listen to this probably aren't going to appreciate this, but it's fine. It's the way, I mean, I've been in the game long enough to tell you this is what happens.
Yeah.
So they come into ministry and they have, let's just call it a pet lion, some little sin in their life. I'm not trying to downplay the sin. I'm just saying it's not full grown. It's an area of his life he should be working on, or she should be working on. They shouldn't be. They should be confessing this. They should be putting it to death. They should be putting, but they're not. And then God starts to use them because God doesn't need you to be all that he's asking you to be for him to flex. And so God starts using them in profound ways. But they also hadn't put this lion to death. And now that lion's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But so's the platform. The platform's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And with the bigger platform, oftentimes, I don't think we can judge faithfulness by outcomes.
Yeah.
But the guys we're talking about here, now you got a church of 5,000. Now you got a church of 6,000. Now, who are you going to tell about this lion? We can't tell anybody about this lion. You can't, because the mistake is that now this job is better than Jesus. Or the shame of it now is going to be so much greater than when your church was 300 and you should have handled this little lion. You should have just a cub, just take it out and shoot it. Probably not even disqualifying, right?
Take it out and
but think about, I'm talking about violence towards sin, right? This is the Apostle Paul, leave no provision for the flesh.
Yeah,
like Paul's like, you don't give it an inch. You don't give it a gasp of air. You choke it out, you drag it out in the street, you murder it, put it to death. That's what he says. Put on Christ, put that nonsense to death.
Yeah.
But what happens is these two things are growing up together. And now you're at a place of greater influence than you probably could have imagined when you were 25, 28, 31, wherever it was when you started. And so now you're stuck. Even if you realize, oh man, this is a problem. Like this is an apex predator I've let into my house. And the shame and pain I'll bring upon my wife and children, or the fruitfulness that I'm seeing, or the disappointment in those, what I'll call them Joabs that are around me. Joab's David's guys, like, what hill are we taking? Who you want me to fight? Who are we fighting today? Joab's that, my buddy Kyle Thompson calls that 3 a.m. friend. Everybody's got a 6 p.m. friend. You got that 3 a.m. friend. He's Joab's your 3 a.m. friend. You're going to disappoint them. You're going to destroy this church or this ministry that God's built. You're going to defame the name of Jesus. And then a guy just starts feeling stuck. And oftentimes, I don't know if it's conscious or not. Now we're going to start taking the steps towards blowing this thing up. And so whether that's been financial or another woman or being ridiculously heavy-handed on people, and I would even want to be careful with that. It's a tough time to be a leader, where there can be all sorts of things that you're accused of that actually might just be leadership,
right.
And so then now you're going to blow this thing.
I like how he did that. He's noticing that the whole talk of bully pulpit and abusive culture, like he's actually. It's not beyond the imagination that he's thinking of Driscoll here. He was good friends with Driscoll. I have no idea if they're still in touch, but that was the accusation of Driscoll. But even the way he's talking about it, he's talking about two things I want to highlight here. One, he's talking about the violence we should have towards sin, and I appreciate that. That's important. You can go read John Owen on that, the mortification of sin, and other places. And yet these more pietistically minded Christians will typically, what they'll do is they'll have an extreme kind of, he talked about murdering it on the street, that kind of stuff. Okay. But that's typically like it's like almost becomes a self-flagellating where you're whipping yourself. And it's fairly strange because then when we see sin out in the world, or when we see pagan celebrations or sodomy celebrated or anything like that, we're not allowed to have the same energy, the same tenor or tone towards that. We have to treat it with kid gloves out there. So it's very odd. The other thing I want to highlight is that the sin all along, it may have been whatever he refers to as a pet sin. I'm not sure what he's referring to there. And that is important, that we be killing sin. And yet, to me, the prior sin was always about the shame he talked about the shame you would feel to other people from other people if you were to fall away or something, or if you were to confess your sin. That's the sin. That's the baked in kind of like mindset of achieve success, all this kind of stuff defines me. That's the sin that needs to be repented of, and it needs to be killed. And yet, in many church planting and pastoral ministry kind of mindsets, it does become that's the thing that grows into the line that needs to be killed. And in a normal, healthy church culture, most pastors in America don't have what he's experienced. There's a lot of mega churches, but most pastors don't experience this. But it is pernicious, and I've seen a friend, take several friends take their own life. We have all these stories of pastors who have blown up their lives, and we'll use the phrase self-sabotage to talk about that. That's what he's talking about here, to like try to escape what he's talking about, this trap. But it was always the sin that needed to be killed was this idolization of, if I get enough people in the pews, then somehow that will be the salve I need. So yeah, it's a very complex topic. I think it's interesting that he's kind of walking back, or at least defending strong pastoral ministry, because he's probably experienced the brunt end of some things that he tried to course correct when Driscoll left, and now he's reaping the consequences.
Thing up because you can't get out of it. And it doesn't make sense because all the shame and killing, and it's on the blow up side too. So that's why I don't think it's prefrontal cortex stuff.
Yep.
I just think a guy's looking for a way out and doesn't know how to do it.
That's good.
But they grew up together. That's been my experience with the guys that I've known that have blown their lives up.
Hey, you are speaking. I know this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's very interesting. I'm just curious from your vantage point, because I know what it's like to be a leader, not a pastor. And to blow something up as a leader is one thing, but like there's not people waiting on me every Sunday for me to show up and be consistent. In the season that we're in, there's a lot of skepticism as far as Christianity is concerned, because of pastors, right? Because of pastors dropping the ball. I would say being human, but obviously, there's a thought process of they're more than human, or they at least should have some kind of superhuman structures around them to protect them from their own humanity. But how do you talk to folks who are like, I don't mess with church because pastors keep dropping the ball?
Sure.
Like, what do you say to folks like that?
Yeah, well, one, I think it's immediately hypocritical in that they're not choosing any other aspect of their life by that standard.
Talk about that. Okay.
Well, I just think if you, if you're looking at sports and this coach does you dirty and moves from here to here, you don't give up on the sport. If you show up at the gym and somebody's on the machine you wanted and you ask how many more reps and they pop off and say something ridiculous, you go, screw that, I'm not working out anymore. I can't believe these people in the gym. Gym people are the most hypocrite. I mean, just no one does that. And even the whole, I don't want to take away from the fact that there are toxic, terrible churches out there.
Sure.
Now that's really interesting. You know what else is interesting is ad-free content. Like not having this interview interrupted by ads.
Skip this.
Most churches are filled with people who are on a various spot on the spectrum of sanctification. So oftentimes the person that hurt you at a church, they're not the church. They're just a brother or sister that's finding their way. And if you knew their backstory, they might be so far from what they used to be, but you're finding them in this moment of their story. And so I think so much of it is refusing to be gracious to other people. It's Jonah. I want justice for everybody else, but mercy for me.
Yeah.
That's what it reeks. And I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about that stuff. That's a whole nother level of evil. Most of the stuff I'm hearing is not that stuff, though. It's just like, that's people. People are like that.
Right.
And Christians are being made different. They're not necessarily different in this moment. They're creatures of their moment in time in history who are being made more like Jesus over an extended period of time. And sanctification isn't up and to the right. It's more like a coil along a horizontal plane, which means every Christian I know has regrettable days. Even guys that have been following Jesus for 35 years, they have weak moments. They have regrettable days. They say things that they wish they could take back. That's everyone.
That's good.
And then when it comes to fallen pastors, I would just say we are talking about such a small group of the overall pool. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of pastors who are faithfully shepherding and walking alongside their people right now. And when you pick these 8 over the last 2-3 years because of their following or because of the size of their church, and you try to lay that tiny sample size across the breadth of Jesus's bride, and I'm just speaking of the Western world. I feel like it's unfair. It doesn't matter that it's unfair, but it's most of the guys I know I posted about this on Instagram a while back. The guys I know who are faithful are so nervous of being accused of not being faithful right now.
Yeah.
They feel paralyzed. So I'm having to constantly go, don't play down to the cynic. The cynic's going to be the cynic. If you live your life by the judgment of the cynic, you'll never attempt anything for the kingdom of God.
That's good.
And so you can't do that. You got to lead. You got to lead with conviction. You got to lead with humility. But if you're always worried that someone's going to accuse you of being controlling, you're never going to do anything. If you're always living under the fear that someone might accuse you of being heavy-handed, then I don't know how you're going to lead. And so walk in humility, walk in accountability, and then lead with conviction, because that's what people follow: convictional leadership. Not fearful, I hope nobody calls me something mean online. And it's honestly, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but it's actually more serious than that right now. You don't need to be guilty. You just have to be accused.
That's true. And you had it.
And
you're out of there.
Yeah, I would like to see him defend the SBC in this way. That would be nice, because you could go to the Southern Baptists and the accusations made against the Southern Baptist churches in America and on issues of abuse. He could do the same thing. But in general, I mean, like, this is fairly good. I mean, he could be helped on his understanding of sanctification and different perspectives. He obviously is kind of like in that whole gospel-centered view of sanctification, and this, he references a spiral and not up and to the right. These are things I've taught. I've kind of taught them less. I mean, bottom line is we should be holy. We're called to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. We can only be perfected by Christ, and yet we should be pursuing sanctification. But like I said earlier, his lack of familiarity with various traditions, theological traditions in Protestant Christianity or the Reformers, kind of shows here. But in general, it's good. It's fun.
I wonder, with you specifically, I've seen historically, I take you to be a very nuanced person.
Try to be.
Right. Like
where I can be.
Well, as a human being, maybe not as a communicator all the time, but as a human being, I'm like, oh, you do a little bit of this, you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you go to Sudan, it's all these different things. You have these perspectives on these things. That's you as a human being, as a person. But is it difficult to flex that nuance when you have people who have expectations on a regular basis? So, case in point, you had some very, very like profound and strong opinions about what happened with George Floyd. But at the same time, you have a congregation of people who could vehemently disagree with you. And you're towing a line here a lot of times with people being like, hey, are you over here or are you over here? What side of the track are you on, Matt? Like, pick a side. Like, do you feel pressure? Do you not care? Like, how do you process that?
No, I totally feel pressure.
Okay.
I'd be lying if I didn't. I feel the pull. Sometimes I think that's what's most exhausting about this journey that the Lord has me on. I had to make a decision as a younger man who I belong to. And do I belong to a specific tribe? Am I their boy? Or am I the Lord's? And am I the Lord's boy? And so I am naturally curious. That's how the Lord built me. I'm still curious. I still, even if we land in very different theological places, help me understand that. Help me understand how you're seeing it. Where are you getting that?
Right.
Help me and not necessarily to fight you about it. I want to understand. And so that's a big driver for me. I want to understand this. I'm not cynical by nature. So my lead foot isn't, they're heretics. My lead foot's like, I need to understand what's going on there. And so I started where I started, and I started seeing things in the tribe I was in that were not just confusing to me, but frustrating. And so I moved towards, I didn't like the answers, was confused by them. And then I could see things in the text that had historically been interpreted a specific way. I began to feel some of the tension of hypocrisy, that if I talked about abortion, my tribe would be like, "Go, we love that prophet. You're fearless. You can go." But then if I talked about race, I was getting political. And I'm like, "Wait, we just sent 200 people to DC to march, but now I'm political." I was feeling all that tension. And then I had to answer the question in that season: do I belong to the Lord, or do I belong to the village? Do I belong to the Lord, or do I belong to the stream or tribe?
I don't buy it. He may be a naturally curious person, but what he said in 2020 absolutely was regrettable at best, regarding Black Lives Matter and the marches and that kind of thing. And this whole nuance thing, the chief goal is to be nuanced, and it's very popular nowadays. It's very popular. Oh, I can see all sides, and people love that kind of idea of a person who's very accommodating to all people and that kind of thing. And the way he's talking about it, the typical tactic: punch right, caught a left. Instead of like that curiosity leading him back to the sources and back to truth, and he's been listening to Eric Mason, Leonce Crump, all these guys who are openly on the left, like just openly that way. And so I don't buy that kind of like nuance. And the thing with this, kind of curious, because I share in that temperament of wanting to be curious about other people and that kind of thing. I don't think it's as genuine as we would think. I think he still has a tribe. He still has certain people he's listening to. And so he thinks he's being bold by saying things like BLM is the church's fault and how dare you question it and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, my guy, you're still tribal. You just have your own tribe. It's the winsome third way tribe. It's inevitable. We're going to be shaped by that. And so there's this pietistic, independent minded, modern attitude that I belong to Jesus and therefore I don't have a tribe. And I think he's going to get into that later, but that's kind of a fantasy. It's just kind of a fantasy.
Do I belong to the Lord? Who am I going to please here?
Yeah.
And those are still things that can happen to me,
right?
Where the Holy Spirit's going to be like, yeah, we'll probably get some blowback from that.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
You want, and I've honestly at times felt permission to not. Like I haven't always felt like the Lord's like, no, you're doing this.
Right.
I have oftentimes felt in those moments, and I think he's doing that honestly to protect the village and protect me. There's only so many shots to the head anybody can take.
Yeah.
It's just the truth.
Yeah.
There's only so many times you get punched upside the head and come back from that.
Yeah.
And so I think there are times that the Lord's not asked me to enter the fray, and then there are times he's invited me in. And so what I'm trying to do imperfectly, the best I can, is where I'm invited into the fray, weigh the cost, and then either get in there or save that for another day. So that's how I've tried to navigate it.
Yeah. Which is, it's tough. I've been in the same position and it's tough. And people will still say, why are you in this fight? Get out of this fight and preach the gospel. And I love something that you said, because you're right. I don't get in every fight. There's some fights.
It's all we do.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's like, you're not going to see me saying save the whales. I'm not going to get in that fight. There may be legitimate reasons for it.
Yeah.
That's not my fight. But you said something and I thought it was very potent. And you said, oftentimes, people are just saying, well, you just need to preach the gospel, and it's like, but you don't tell that to sex traffickers. You don't say, hey, go preach the gospel and that'll stop sex trafficking. You take action. Yeah. And I thought that was very, very powerful. Have you, do you arrive there supernaturally, like, wow, or are you asking questions and you get there? How do you land the plane in some of these places?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, the gospel speaks into every issue. The gospel, the gospel of the kingdom is about making a whole different kind of community.
Yeah.
It's not so to preach the gospel as though it's just individual salvation is reductionistic. The kingdom of God is God forming a people that reveals his beauty and grace, his truth, beauty, and goodness to the world around him.
Yeah.
And this has been his plan from day one.
That's right.
And so the gospel does create individual children of God, but it also creates a community that's meant to operate a specific way.
Yeah.
So the argument, just preach the gospel on really any of those subjects, I'm just like, this is the gospel. The gospel creates this kind of community.
This is so bad. This is so bad. Why? It's because in some ways I agree with them. Pastors are responsible for communicating the truths of Scripture for the edification of their people. They're to divide Scripture rightly. But what he just did, the twist there was what I heard constantly, what you'll still hear constantly. This is the gospel. And it becomes kind of this cherry picking based on who you're listening to. This is a gospel issue. And this gets used as a cudgel to beat up certain groups. Okay. And so the gospel for a lot of these gospel-centered types has become very vague and very unspecific, and it's not well thought out. It is a rhetorical tactic to try to goad the church into embracing certain viewpoints. We shouldn't be doing that, and so I take issue with it strongly because of that reason. And I don't think that these guys have really learned much out of the Young Restless Reform. The gospel-centered Young Restless Reform stuff was very popular, and yet they're incredibly partisan when it comes to what is a gospel issue and what is not. LeCrae highlights this, but these are two men who have not really thought deeply about this, and they're just kind of in this cool leadership network. We're all big churches, we all have big influence, and they're all in group chats and all this kind of stuff. Oh yeah, that's a gospel issue. That's a gospel issue. And they're riling each other up. And I get it. People are social creatures, relational beings. And so that happens. But I think there's a bit of blindness there.
The gospel saves people into the family of God who are now ordered by family law.
Yeah.
This stuff's family law. It doesn't save, but the saved are moving in this direction, which is why Paul rebuked Peter when he downshifted back into his racism and said, this is out of step with what? The gospel. This is out of step with the gospel. He doesn't mean Peter's personal salvation.
Yeah.
He means the kingdom of God making its way through the ancient world.
Yeah.
And so again, I think it's an easy straw man argument that happens all the time. I was just on a podcast with
He accused Peter of racism. That's an interesting interpretation of that passage. I'm not going to get into it right now. Just, that's what gets used. All of a sudden, if you commit a racism, it's a gospel issue. What is racism? These are big issues today, and yet these guys kind of operate with one, we'll say, tone on these.
A guy out he's in Seattle now. He's in San Francisco, former NFL player. And we were talking about taking care of the body, and then it popped up there. He was like, I didn't know Matt Chandler didn't preach the gospel anymore. And I was like, well, this is an implication of the kind of community God's building, not, nobody's going to get saved by spinach and sleep, some Pilates, going for a walk. But God cares about our physical health.
Right.
He does care about our physical health and stewarding our bodies towards the good work of his kingdom.
Yeah.
And so I hate that little phrase. It just shows how we've reduced the gospel to the single moment of conversion rather than the gospel being for all of life.
That's good.
Which contradicts what he said earlier. It's just so frustrating. There's so many contradictions. Like, on the one hand, you hate the people that are cultural Christians, and you talk about Christ. He kind of committed a Wilson there, all of Christ for all of life. But these are very complex issues. Actually, to be fair, they're not actually complex issues. If you would just do the reading, and think more broadly than your tribe, which was very hot for about 20 years, and you're still connected with all these guys, if you would broaden it, there are ways to think about these things where you don't have to use these same words that you've been using. And so it creates this mess, where on the one hand, we're trying to build a Christian culture. On the other hand, we hate Christian culture. It's conversionistic, and yet people are too conversionistic. This is a mess. It's just a mess.
Your book, The Overcomers.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you've written a couple books already.
I wonder
why are you writing this book? Why another book? Why this one?
Yeah, I just think I'm trying to speak into this moment we find ourselves in that's filled with anxiety or outrage.
Yeah.
Sometimes a mingling of both. Somebody needs to think of a new emotion, which is anxious rage, maybe. Maybe that'll be my next book. But I was seeing, especially after all the turmoil of 2021, even in the church I pastor, I was seeing a pulling back from the mission of God as it lays in front of us. And this was playing itself out across evangelicalism in either acquiescence to the culture or silence. And I wanted to call people into the victory of King Jesus.
Yeah.
Like it is my adamant belief that this is our moment in history.
Yeah.
Like, we're God's big plan for this moment. Like, nobody's coming to bail us out of this thing.
And what's happening in this moment? You're talking about post-COVID, all
like I'm saying the train wreck that we find ourselves in culturally.
Right.
Politically, economically, religiously. I mean, name a domain.
Okay.
Train wreck.
Okay.
So what this does, if you're not careful and you're a Christian, is it will create anxiety. I don't want to be labeled as a bigot. I don't want to be, I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want my faith to be misunderstood. So let me acquiesce, give in, become more progressive, if you will. Or let me just watch these 8 seasons of Suits on Netflix. Let me just doom scroll and let me go to church and keep reading my Bible, but sit this one out and let's leave this fight to the LeCraes and Matt Chandlers of the world. And we'll just, but that's not how the kingdom of God spread across the world. It hadn't spread through blue check celebrity Christians, although God's used those.
Yeah.
The gospel has grown to 2.38 billion Christians worldwide through the everyday faithfulness of ordinary Christians working in a domain of society, living in a neighborhood of a town or city, and doing so faithfully, being gospel heralds and gospel inviters. And I wanted to just say, hey guys, this is our moment. Like, C.S. Lewis isn't about to come bail us out with some clever narrative.
Yeah, I mean, he's right in a sense. It's still just rhetorically, I find it kind of gross. Like, it's compelling to a lot of Christians, okay? And I agree with a lot of what he's saying. I just gospel this, gospel that, and then this is our moment. It's like, yeah, well, the church has been around for a long time. It's the anvil on which many nations are crushed. And so I don't sense a lot of depth in terms of how we're thinking it. It would be interesting to get his book and get him on the podcast to talk about his book. That would be hilarious. But yeah, it's just, on the one hand, you want Christians to change culture, change society. Yeah, you have cultural Christians and cultural Christianity. It's a mess.
Narratives. G.K. Chesterton isn't going to show up and critique the current political climate.
Wow.
It's our moment, and don't sleep on it.
Wow.
And so I got the phrase "the overcomers" from the book of Revelation. So when Jesus is writing John writing Jesus' words to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, at the end of each letter, he says, "And to he who overcomes, I will give. To he who overcomes, I will give. To he who overcomes, I will give." And so the overcomers is that framework. You've been uniquely wired, uniquely gifted, and uniquely placed by God in this moment of history to push back darkness, establish light. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
No matter what domain you're a housewife. This is what uniquely wired, uniquely placed, uniquely gifted as a housewife or a businesswoman or a politician or a firefighter or a welder or a C-suite executive.
Yeah.
Uniquely wired, uniquely placed, uniquely gifted. And then what I did is got into the book of Revelation and just walked us through Revelation as a template of the victory of King Jesus over every principality, power, and dark moment to infuse the Christian with courage.
Yeah.
So the book of Revelation has been given to the people of God for 2,000 years to put steel in their spine and to help them live courageously despite what they might be seeing.
Yeah.
It's only been in the last 150, 180 years that book's been made really goofy and inaccessible. Historically, this has put steel into the spines of Christians. So I wanted to reclaim that some. It's a book of discipleship. It's not necessarily a book of like just belonging to that generation that's here before the second coming of Christ. That's not what it is. It's not like, hey, this doesn't matter for most people for 2,000 years, but this one group, it's gonna make all the sense in the world to this last group. That's not what it was given for. John's clear. It's an apocalyptic book. It's a letter written to a specific group of people at a specific time in a specific place, which means that it cannot mean for us what it did not mean for them. That the book was written for me, but not written to me. And so I'm trying to save it in some ways from the nonsense that makes people afraid of it or confused by it.
Yeah, I mean, he's dumping on dispensational theology. I appreciate that. And he sounds fairly post-mill, which is odd. I don't know if he's leaning that way or not. I think he's historically been amillennial. Very popular position in Acts 29 because it was always uncontroversial, well, symbolic, and Jesus reigns, rather than pre-mill or post-mill. But yeah, I mean, he's repeating a lot of the stuff that he's picked up along the way. 30 years of pastoral ministry from thinkers like Sam Storms and other people who have helped educate him on these kind of like, how do we do a biblical interpretation? So it'll be interesting to see what his book says.
So what I'm hearing you say is, on one end of the spectrum, everyone who feels like they've been sitting around waiting for someone to speak into the chaos that we're existing in can stop waiting for something to happen, and like they're invited to be a part of that transformation.
They are part of it.
Right. They're a part of that transformation. And I can also learn the book of Revelation, which is confusing to me if I'm in this particular space. When you said no one, like it's not about blue check celebrity Christians, that triggered me a little bit, because I remember a time period, probably around 2016, where there was a search for who's going to be the leader now. You know, like it was like, I think there's always been like this Christian figurehead, like there's a Billy Graham or somebody, and there was like this search, and everyone was trying to figure out who's going to rise to the occasion. And I guess no one ever did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, maybe Keller starting in 16 became the kind of pope.
Yeah, for sure.
The Protestant pope.
I can see that. Yeah. Keller's,
but I know what you're saying.
Keller's
You're
a class of his own. But in terms of like just being that figurehead that sweeps across, the globe, and it's like, this is the person who we come to for perspective.
Yeah.
You're saying, in fact, we collectively need to move forward.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that the everyday man or woman in the pews or in the neighborhood or in the workplace has to own the mission and can't just give it to these high profile, extroverted, charismatic, anointed people.
Yeah.
Like I've got a platform God's given me to steward, and I shouldn't shrink back from that. I should embrace it and own it and steward it the best of my ability.
Yeah.
But that's not how the kingdom of God ultimately breaks loose in a place.
Yeah.
It's when the housewife or the businessman or the C-suite executive or the politician or the welder or the trash guy starts to own the mission where he is, not be afraid of the darkness, and begin to push it back and establish light and be the hands and feet of Jesus where they are. So I'm advocating, instead of a come and see approach, let me take you to this Cray show. Let me take you to church, hear Matt Chandler preach.
Yeah.
I'm advocating for a prayer walking your neighborhood, opening up your dinner table, praying with people in the workspace, taking a stand that might cost you, knowing that your reward will be better, and living that kind of life rather than one of silence or doom scrolling, feeling paralyzed, or acquiescence to the culture.
That's good. Yeah, because I think,
I mean, it's fine. It's fine. He's mixing categories a lot with kingdom, church, mission. He's saying all these things like, where is the advocacy for the people of the village church to go to the local school board meetings and for Christians to enter that place and remove all the LGBTQ books from the curriculum and all this kind of stuff. So it's still very quietistic. It confuses what our mission is in the world. It can, he talks about vocation. This is actually really good that he's talking about, vocational Christianity in terms of how we live out our faith in the world. These are good things, and people need that today. And he's right. We don't want to give into the progressive narrative and just become progressive Christians. We don't just want to escape. And he's like right up on the line of just embracing reality and like talking about the culture war. But he's so entrenched in a certain mindset that the best he can do is say, it's still going to be very conversionistic centered in terms of how we do cultural engagement. It's very neutral public square, marketplace of ideas. And the prayer walking, great thing. Do these things that he's talking about. Yeah, recommend. But I don't know that he's getting into the places that are actually where the battle rages hottest. I think it's to encourage people, and I hope they take the next step. Okay, so then where do I go? What do I do? What am I being called to? And if the best is just make sure, you're living in holiness, not being on Instagram too much, and don't give in to progressivism. It's good enough in some ways, but it still leaves a lot on the table to explore.
I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I have had to land my plane on is that if the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, is the fruit of the Spirit, how will the world experience that if they don't have the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
So those of us who do, hey, we need to be demonstrating the evidence of the gospel transforming us.
And we're like, since I'm in the house, we are terrible right now. We destroy our own. We like everything's like, I'm so frustrated by evangelical culture right now.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody hates us like we hate us. Nobody is as cynical towards us as we are. And by us, I just mean those outside of your little stream.
Yeah.
I mean, so quick to attack, so quick to tear down, so quick to not give the benefit of the doubt. All those things that were meant to be seem to be lacking right now. We look just like the world. And so that can grate against me.
Yeah.
And I know.
Dude, it's got to be a joke. I mean, like, this is like all the principles that he says he stands for, and he sits on the board of Acts 29, and a church like ours is asking questions and doing this kind of stuff, being curious and trying to hear the other side and being nuanced and don't attack your own. What do you do when somebody starts asking questions? I released a pod interview defending this man when he was put under quote unquote church discipline for messaging, I'm assuming, a girl in DMs, and nobody knows what the context is. Nobody knows. There was no investigation done. And he was restored to ministry, quote unquote, a few months later. I defended him because I think it was a weird, pietistic, above reproach method to try to satiate some feminists that came up to one of their lead pastors in the lobby, who threatened to go public with what she thought was a scandalous story, and so they caved on that. But then to get on here and say, nobody attacks Christians like that, like Christians are, it's wild. There's a deep inconsistency because I don't know what you would call unilaterally removing a church from a network without warning them with no process of appeal after that church has invested deeply and been friends with many people in the network, and then just excising them without hearing them out or listening to them or, hearing both sides or letting them exist. It's just, I'm going to use the word, it feels hypocritical. It feels deeply hypocritical for this kind of rhetoric to come from this guy who sits in his position.
We're about to head into a political season. It's going to get even more ridiculous.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Like the fact that we're moving into a political season,
yeah.
and, there are people who have expectations of you as a pastor, right? As a pastor in Texas.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So how do you navigate the expectations that people have on you?
Notice how he said that, Texas. And it's negative. It's framed negative. Like, Texas, that's so cool that you're there. You're fighting the darkness. You have a huge opportunity to help Texans think more biblically about cultural matters. It was a head turn, and that's obviously that's got to be hard because they want to be conservative. And what are you going to do to help them not be so conservative? Like, that's what that is.
Yeah, politically. So here's what I try to do. Like, you can fill in that last little word politically with anything else.
Okay.
On any topic, you've got these two fringes, right?
Go.
You got this far right side, this far left side. You got them. I'm never going to give an ounce of thought to those folk.
Okay.
I'm not going to be able to win them no matter what I say. They're going to misinterpret. They're going to misapply. That's just permission to play in leadership now, where you got to get up and say stuff. Then there's this group of men and women that deeply love Jesus and are confused at what it looks like to follow him. And I'm going to aim right at that. And so I'm going to do a 6-week series called Thrones and Thorns. And I'm just going to go right at it.
Okay.
And I'm going to just lay out God's vision for authority, his kingly reign, where we ultimately give allegiance to, how we're good citizens, why policy actually matters, what is Christian nationalism and what isn't. I just think that's such a way to shut people down. And it's Christian nationalism. Well, okay, maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Look at that.
So
he's defending a legitimate view of Christian. This is great. This is great. He's seeing this. I don't know who's in his ear. He's listening to somebody that's helped him on this. Because the best thing Chandler has going for him isn't his education. We've already highlighted that. It's who he has access to. Guys like Chandler, because they're famous and big names, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers. If he were to message any seminary prof or president or someone that he's like curious to learn more from, those people are going to definitely entertain Chandler because he has massive influence. He would be a massive win if Chandler could, and I hope the series is good. I hope it's good. I'm skeptical, but I hope it's good. And I hope he equips his people biblically. But notice he's still positioned it third way. It's still third way. He's embracing the paradigm. And then he thinks that the gospel mandate is what the kind of language they're going to use. I don't know if they're going to use it here, is to not give in to either side. And yeah, that does lead to you feeling trapped. And so my encouragement is stop giving into that narrative. But let's see what he does.
It's going to be an interesting fall, but I just plan on going at it.
Would you, regardless of, this is a little bit of an underwater question, but it's, you can swim. Regardless of whatever political party, let's say it's Republican, let's say it's Democrat. If you have a senator from either party in your congregation and they're like, hey, will you come be a part of said thing? How do you? Okay.
And we even had, and I'm glad there's someone in the room that knows my world, not you, but my assistant over here. But we literally had the governor of the state of Texas show up and then call us and be like, hey, we'd love to say a prayer or something. I was like, yeah, no.
Okay.
I'll pray for you.
Yeah.
But no, we don't do that. Now, I will say that might change for me on local issues, like school board issues, things like that. I might be a little bit more vocal about. But no, sir, you don't get to use my pulpit for that.
He's just thinking in terms of the audience in this third way rhetoric, above the fray, nuanced on everything. He's not like, yes, there is a weird like marriage in some churches in America. Many black churches will have Democrats come speak in their pulpit, and I think that's inappropriate. And then some will have Republican, conservative, white churches will have conservative politicians come speak. And I think there's a way to do that. I would love to know if you prayed for Greg Abbott and if there's alignment with Greg Abbott on particular issues that he could lead his church in prayer for. Lord, please equip Greg Abbott to stop the massive immigration problem that we see on our southern border. Give him wisdom and discernment. I wonder if that was ever prayed. What a huge opportunity. And that's what I was referencing earlier. He has a huge opportunity. He's been gifted. For whatever reason, God has chosen to grow this church. Many people have come to the Lord. He has a massive opportunity, but he talks about being courageous on one hand, and yeah, where's the courage here? So it's interesting you brought up school boards. I brought that up earlier. I wonder what that actually looks like.
Yeah, here's the best thing I've heard, and I'll certainly say this fall. One, neither side is for us.
That's good.
Neither side is for us.
That's good.
And this is N.T. Wright. So I'm stealing from N.T. Wright, Michael Bird, Jesus and the Powers.
That's a terrible book. And of course you would read it. It's a terrible book. Do not read that book. It's written by an Australian and a British dude. Neither of those dudes are American. Their political interpretation of reality is just principled pluralism to the nth degree. In fact, they interpret the Bible as a principally pluralistic book to uphold democracy and all this kind of stuff. It's a I think there was a review in First Things on it. Please don't read that book. You can't, I would never stop you from reading it, but know that what you're getting in that book is not helpful. And so what he's about to say is going to be reflective of that book, and I bet it's going to be trash.
You gave him credit.
The book.
You say it.
No, this is the second time I've said it. So it's the third time. I'm going to say a friend of mine says.
Is it in the Overcomers book?
No, it's not. I should have. This book came out after mine. Right. But he said, I just thought this was brilliant, that the left wants the kingdom but does not want the king, and the right wants the king but does not want the kingdom. Good sakes, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it, Cray, and then I'm going to probably say it like I thought of it in the fall. I can't do that now. Dang it, we might edit that out.
It's these rhetorical games are so exhausting. It's because so many Christians, like he's saying he's aiming for the middle, which actually makes me frustrated because I actually think there's a lot of Christians who are deeply confused right now about what to do and how to move forward, how to be a faithful Christian in this kind of climate, politically, culturally, all this kind of stuff. But it's not that complicated. And they use these rhetorical tactics. The left does not want the kingdom. The kingdom, you look at how the Bible describes the kingdom and look at what the left stands for. They do not want the kingdom. Of course, the typical talking points are they actually care for the poor, the right doesn't. They care about the immigrant, but the right doesn't. They care about the single unwed mother, but the right doesn't. This is nonsense. These are tropes that are trotted out to diminish Christians from engaging in real issues that people are facing using a clever alliteration and the right wants a king without a kingdom. No, that's not true either. And I tend to agree with them. The political parties, part of the reason the neocons are so upset at the Republican National Convention is because they're no longer in charge. The neocons had that principled pluralism. They'd been using evangelicals for years, and they'd done nothing to accomplish anything. All of a sudden, this crazy guy named Donald Trump gets in office, and he puts on pro-life Supreme Court justices and Roe's overturned. Incredible thing that God used a crazy man like Donald Trump to accomplish, and yet he's not willing to engage in what is actually politics. And so it'll be interesting to see what he talks about. But that phrase right there is going to get used and used and used. You hear the same thing. You'll see the graphics online about I worship the lion and the lamb, not an elephant or a donkey. I mean, this is when Wolf critiques pastors speaking politically. This is the kind of stuff he's talking about. Like, stop. Just stop. Do what you think you should do. The pastoral ministry, care for people, meet with people, pastor people, divide the word, administer the ordinances rightly. Do that. Practice church discipline, and then let that blossom into engagement out there. But on the one hand, he's saying, I'm not going to have Greg Abbott. I'm not going to, whatever. And then he says stuff like this. It's just deeply unhelpful.
Isn't that great? Because that's my experience. But like you bring up King Jesus over here.
Yeah, it's like,
that's a problem.
Hey.
But you bring up the poor.
Yeah.
You bring up immigration.
Yeah.
You bring up, so even now, I know if you're writing, you heard me say, like, let's open borders. No, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah.
But that's the fringe. That's how they're going to respond to anything.
There's no
say.
nuance.
So I'm not even like, whatever, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I believe. And I'm going to let the crickets chirp.
That's very interesting because as you
No, it's a way of avoiding actual intellectual rigor. What he's doing is not. That's the sick thing about it is it postures itself as being like above the fray, not going to give in. I'm smarter. I'm more nuanced. When actually, like, so then what are you for? Like, if you're gonna touch on the topic of immigration, what policies would you actually say are most biblical for our nation? If you want to go full theonomic, if you want to go what some people would call Christian nationalist, like, what are you proposing? Instead, he's just like, I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm above that. And it's like, dude, you wrote a book on courage. Show some courage.
Say that I have never considered pressure. I know the pressure of being a black man in a racial climate that people thought was political, right? Like, it's you got to be political, and the pressure of people saying there's no possible way there's anything good about the right.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I would to even acknowledge anything over here, it's as if I have disregarded everything that is happening in this racially charged climate. So I know that pressure from the left side. I never thought about it from the right side. I never thought about people being like, hey, Matt, you know what I mean?
Like if I mention race or immigration, those are gonna be the two places that almost immediately I can feel the room change temperatures.
That's crazy.
That's because you do it poorly. I mean, that's why you're still trying to third way rhetoric, everything. And even the way they talk about it, these guys are very, very sensitive in terms of, well, where's the pressure coming from? Who's pressuring me? And, I got to resist that. And all. On the one hand, they talk about, I belong to the Lord. And on the other hand, all they talk about is there's so much pressure. There's so much pressure. And they're going to talk about how Jesus, frees us from anxiety, from that pressure, and then creates a third way rhetoric. And we're above it all in nuance. And it's like, they're missing the plot. They've lost it.
I don't know if I would disappoint people so much. I wouldn't want your job. That's what I'm saying.
Again, keep in mind, my responsibility before the Lord is to be obedient to him and then care for these people in the middle.
Yeah. So good.
I've spent enough time on these fringes to know this isn't rational.
Yeah.
It's not reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably spiritual. And nothing I say is heard, even if I'm giving the qualifying statement, if I don't believe this, then the way they hear it is he believes this.
Yeah.
No. When you say I don't believe that, then articulate what you actually believe. And that's why it's like, on the one hand, you're writing a book on courage. On the other hand, you're not taking courageous stances on anything, as far as I can tell, unless it aligns left, unless it's left coded. Then all of a sudden the hammer comes out, and it's like, you better be about Black Lives Matter. But abortion, it's a complicated issue. We want to care for people, and we shouldn't punish women, all this kind of stuff. That's what we're talking about. And he acts like no one's going to hear him. Dude, thousands of people hear you. I'm listening right now. And that's why people are frustrated.
Yeah. And so why spend the limited amount of energy I have there?
Yeah.
So I'm going to aim at the people that love Jesus, love his word, want to be faithful, not sure what it looks like,
Yeah.
hate both options,
Yeah.
don't know what to do, feel compelled to take advantage of their civic right purchased by the blood of others to participate in this democratic republic.
Yeah.
How do we do it? What do we do? And I'm going to try to go at that this fall.
That's good. I think that what I appreciate about you in all the wisdom that you have and all of the insight is the level of transparency and vulnerability as well. You don't wave this banner of I have it all together. Look at me, your chest puffed up.
Gosh.
I mean, you do the Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You're still in shape.
Depending on what belt you are.
Okay,
white belt I might flex unless you wrestled in college or you guys are all bent down. Then a lot of respect shown to the white guy with cauliflower ears.
But I'm just saying
I gotta speed this
that
up.
is a little countercultural for like, someone who has the conservative kind of theological acumen and perspectives, and like that's a little off-putting for some folks to like, wait, why are you vulnerable like this? Why are you transparent? And I won't even say it's not even a conservative liberal thing. I think it's more so just like American Christian culture in a lot of ways says you should have it together. And you've taken your hits on the chin, you've owned your shortcomings and your failures. Do you feel like you in some like people are not very gracious when you do those types of things, right? Like, do you feel like there's a sense of like is there a season where it's like I gotta prove that I'm consistent or I'm legit? Or here's what I've learned now. 23 years in the game, 30 years overall, 23 at the village. There's a group of people out there. And they love me, man. I mean, it don't matter what I do. Like, there'd be a video came of me clubbing a baby seal, and they would be like, "What'd that seal do to Pastor Matt before they shot? I need to see the pre-video." Okay. And then there's a group of people over here, and they hate me. For whatever reason, I'm the problem with evangelicalism, right? White, megachurch, suburban, he's in it for money and power. No matter what I do, that's the lens. Right? Neither of them know me. It's good. Neither of them know me. It's good. They don't know me. They don't know the rest. I can't take my cues from either one of them. I can't. If I'm your guy, man, you've been in my ears for 20 years, bro. Jesus, praise God. You don't know me. And if you think I'm the problem, and I'm in this for money and power and fame, then you do not know me. And so I've learned. A good friend of mine told me that if I was going to survive in this game, I needed what he called a king's table. He was referencing King David, and he said David had these seats around his table that when they were full, he thrived. And when he lost one, it all came crumbling down. So he said every leader needs a Joab. By the way, Joab's the easiest chair to fill if you're a leader. Joab's the who we fighting today, boss. We talked about that earlier. Like, which hill we taking? Where are we fighting? I'm in. You need a Nathan. You need an older man. It's like, hey, you're being stupid. And then you need a Jonathan, a lover of your soul. And this guy, he didn't care about your gifts. He didn't care about your reach. He didn't care about the Lord's just knit his heart to yours and yours to him. And I was told, if I'll cultivate that, I'll feel safe all the days of my life. And I've worked really hard, maybe especially the last decade, to cultivate that where I am fully known by a king's table. I mean, those guys, they get my tax returns. Come on, man. I've got no secrets, man. Why?
And
That's kind of weird, but this is very popular, this kind of idea. And one could suggest this table is somewhat of a tribe that informs you, and you're going to put people at the table that just so happen to align with you on certain political and approaches to ministry, all sorts of matters. But notice how he mentioned safe. He wants to feel safe. And these words, these vulnerability, authenticity, all this kind of stuff, have we gotten tired of it yet? Are we tired yet? I'm tired because it's performative to a sentimental culture, where, I feel this pressure as a pastor. One of the easiest ways to reach people in a sentimental culture is like, I don't have it all together and I don't know what I'm doing. And it's just like fake humility. And I'm not saying he's fake. I'm just saying it's very popular and easy to do nowadays, even though they're both saying it's not. It's like really not that hard. Oh, I'm not that smart, blah, blah. Yeah, that's a game. It's a game. Whereas in fact, you could say, I have a job to do. I have a duty before the Lord to do this job as a pastor. And some people are going to know me better. Some people are going to know me. Some of this stuff is good. Okay. Manly brotherhood, good. I'm just obviously suspicious of how it's going.
And I can rest in that in a way that I would never find rest if I'm believing what these people say about me or trying to prove these people wrong.
Sorry. Keep going back to this. Calvin's Company of Pastors, great book. These are questions that people have been wrestling with for thousands of years. These are not new tensions, problems, pressures, whatever. And if we would just study a little bit about history and how pastors have navigated, how do we find brotherhood? But what you're not going to hear them talking is in the same pietistic language they're talking. Calvin doesn't talk about, having these three figures at his table or that paradigm. We have all these leadership paradigms, these rhetorical games. And it's like, study the old dead guys and ministers who came before you. Yes, it's good to have deep friends as a pastor, but it gets translated so weird today.
That's good, man.
And so I've got a crew that I run with. Most of them have been with me for a long time. Josh Patterson, 20 years. Mason King, 15 years. Trevor Joy, 15 years. Nick's a newer guy to that table, but just a complete stud. Became fast family. Yeah. Those are my guys, man.
That's good.
You can bring up anything about me, any story from my life, and they can tell you. They know me. And I'm going to take my cues from because they have rebuked me. They have moved towards me and gone, we see a gap. We see a gap here. We love you, Matt. We see a gap. Not Pastor Matt, not Pastor Matt. See a gap. And so that I'm going to live by that group of guys and under the authority of the elders of the village church. And I am going to, as best I can, imperfectly, by his grace, not trust these people who love me but don't know me, or these people who are cynical and hate me and don't know me.
Yeah.
If I try to serve either one of those, I'm going to say things the Lord's not asking me to say. I'm going to try to justify myself to these people,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to believe these people's version of me in a way that's not helpful. And what I've learned, this is crazy now, and I know you experienced this, some of these people became these people when I finally touched that idol that they had. So they loved me when I was punching everybody else in the head. And when the Holy Spirit like turned my attention to that other thing, boom, they're over here now. One, they put me up too high over here to begin with. And now they're over here because I did the same thing that drew me to them when it was happening to everybody else.
Yeah.
But then when I touched their thing, now they're over here. And so I just can't do life that way, man. It's exhausting. So I'm going to trust the men and women God's put around me and those I've invited deeply in to hold me accountable.
Yeah.
And we know the stakes.
Yeah.
Like the guys, we have this concept, shield to shield. We pulled it from a book called Gates of Fire. There's a way the Spartans fought. My shield protects the guy to the left of me. It doesn't protect me. I got to rely on his. And so we're in this. And our commitment is we want to finish well. We want to finish well, man. We want to make it to the end by the grace of God. Talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
If a pastor falls, we're on the phone. What can we learn? How do we hold fast? What do we have in place to make sure one of us doesn't stumble into that? How do we hold each other accountable to maybe the baby lion version of this? How do we, and those are the kind of conversations we're always having. And that's what a King's Table gets you, is guys who don't give two craps how well your book does or how your record does.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah.
And Joab's there to take whatever hill, and Nathan's there to give you some wisdom. And but a guy has to invite those guys in, especially if he's like, most people aren't just going to come up to LeCrae and be like, let me tell you something about your life. So LeCrae's going to have to say, I want to invite you to be this guy for me. I need these guys. Be this guy for me.
Yeah.
And I know you have. I know some of those guys. And leaders have to invite other guys, give them permission to help me fill in my gaps.
Yeah.
Help me see my blind spots. They're called blind spots because I won't see them. So help me see them.
This is interesting. As you said this, and this, I wasn't even thinking about this until you just started talking about it. The shield to shield is really what made me think about it. But I think we're in a unique time as far as men are concerned in society, right? Like, I know you probably have someone in your congregation who's a Navy SEAL and someone in your congregation who is a talk therapist, the guy who's a talk therapist and, enjoys the botanical gardens.
Sure.
How would you address kind of this like weird space where guys are trying to figure out what does it mean to be a man? Where you get a guy like Andrew Tate who rises up because he's calling people to be something. And
This will be interesting because so far it's been very therapeutic language, and I'm fascinated.
you also have guys who are like, well, the women have been abused so much, let's just let them lead right now. Like, what are you telling your guys in this season where everyone's trying to figure out what the heck does this look like?
Yeah, I think there is a special position given to the man, a special authority given to the man. I just think it's really hard to argue that out of the scriptures. And so whether the man enjoys jiu-jitsu like I do, or the botanical gardens like I can occasionally enjoy, neither behavior is what makes him masculine or non-masculine. To step into the confidence of the authority and calling of God on your life is the most masculine thing there is. And so Lauren, I married a strong woman. I did not marry what are we doing? I did not marry. She's got thoughts, she's got opinions, she's got, and what she loves most about my leadership is that I'm leading out of conviction and in a direction. And she's coming with me, and she's got a much more sharp discernment gift than I do. Like, I really am. If people can meet me, like, I'm like a human golden retriever, man. I just want to jump up on you and love you. And where are we going? What are we doing? And Lauren has at times gone, there's some danger there. And so I'm a fool if I don't, even though I'm the leader of our home, bring her gifts to bear on our home and on my life and on my, and that's the most masculine thing I do. Not hunt elk, not fight grown men, not, it's that. I'm going to lead with conviction. This is what the temperature of our household should be. This is the direction we're moving as a family. Not done in isolation. So like, woman, here's what we're doing. Right. That ain't, I don't know. You listen to this, you married that woman. You shouldn't have. It's a worse marriage for a woman who's not gonna be like, hold on, baby. I just got a couple thoughts. Let me give you a couple thoughts. And you be very serious about those thoughts, respecting the divine in her. And so I think where it gets hard is if we paint masculinity with the Andrew Tate, brush. Because there are men that they're gonna have more maybe historic feminine traits. And I don't want to say that this one's more masculine than this one, because I know some men who lead with conviction and love like Jesus, who are never going to shoot a gun in their life. Who, if it had to happen, they would jump into the fray, but they're not trained to prepare for that in any way. They're not. They're just going to try to de-escalate and run, which is what everybody should do, right? But a lot of guys out there training for that 1% chance. But I just want to say, if you're leading with conviction and you've got a God-sized vision for your home and your family, I think that's the most masculine thing you can be doing. And I think the more passive you are, the more feminine you're being.
I agree. I would even add, pursue excellence, pursue great achievements, dominate a field. All that stuff is very masculine. So what he's saying is good. As far as his wife and how you should find a wife, I don't find it terribly helpful and that kind of thing. He kind of diminishes himself in terms of his own discernment. I bet he's got some decent discernment in some ways. But yeah, generally it's good. He gives way too much leeway on kind of the more effeminate men in our culture. I think that's way too permissive to help men grow.
Even if you like a soy latte or something, that's not as, listen, that passivity is not the role or the place God's called men to walk. And with all the accusations around any kind of masculinity being kind of toxic right now, I think that's where guys feel paralyzed. And so Andrew Tate is a kind of hyper response and overcorrection to a real problem. And that's what I'm afraid of if we don't thread this needle well and get to some real biblical masculinity, what that means.
Third way. Yeah. You got to pitch it third way. That's what he's always going to do.
Means it doesn't mean is that you're starting to see it more and more now that there's this growing trend of, men who are, they're going to fight, and they're going to take back over, and they got the new homestead movement where it's like, let's go make our own butter at the house. I'm saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying,
like butter, but
this is a overcorrection of a cultural issue. If you want to live your life that way, praise God. But I think God's got something really beautiful for us as men and women, as we complement one another in the roles that He's given us.
I felt particularly burdened in this last season to say, like, wait a minute, what the heck is happening out here? Because I don't like the overcorrection. I'm like, that's a little too much tyranny. But at the same time, I'm like, but I also don't like us being like, yeah, it's all the same. And I'm like, no,
Ain't gonna work.
it's not the same. Yeah.
Left, right, third way. These guys they talk about being courageous and being strong, but they're never, everything is framed this way. Too extreme on both sides, got to thread the needle, blah, 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 blah. It's like, bro, quit. Like, just embrace reality. Yeah, these guys are actually shaking in their boots about these things.
Not saying. This is great, man. I gotta throw you underwater. Let's go. So, we have this session on our pod where we just say, hey man, can you sink or swim? You know what I mean? And so, we're gonna throw you underwater. Some people say like the issue with some of the pastors in leadership and some of the poor leadership or what have you is because of the megachurch model.
Yeah.
And I know you have some unique perspectives on that. Like, share with us your thoughts on that particular issue.
Yeah, I think there's what's been interesting to me is for the last 20 years, I've been reading about how the megachurch is over, how it's going to die, how it's going to go away, and there's just absolutely no data to support that. I think megachurches have unique dangers, but the reason why people tie these massive falls to these megachurches is these are the guys that are, I mean, it's probably happening all the time, and maybe even more in churches of 100 or 120, 130, but that doesn't have the following, and it's certainly...
He didn't say that earlier. He said there's a lot of faithful guys, and these are exceptional cases, and now he's saying it's happening all the time because he works for a megachurch, and he's gonna, oh, jeez.
Going to get the clicks online as one of these well-known guys does. And so I think but I do think there's some unique dangers in a church that size with that amount of money and that amount. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just think you have to go in knowing there's some unique dangers to it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't think the megachurch model breeds those who fall from grace. I think there's some unique opportunities for the enemy to work in a model like that. But I don't know if I want to say that those opportunities aren't at the smaller church.
Yeah.
I think the enemy is going to go after guys in leadership wherever they are. I just think the megachurch guy going to have a lot more money on the table. He's going to have a lot more, let's call it quote unquote fame, because Christian famous ain't famous. And I've been around famous.
Yeah,
and Christian famous ain't famous.
I understand exactly.
You know better
I know better not, because man.
And so there are some temptations that are going to be there that will still be in the guy's heart, if we're honest, whose church is running 200.
Yeah.
But the explosion, media explosion, online explosion of this brother is going to be 10 times, 100-fold what this brother is, unless this thing's so heinous that it works out another way.
I hadn't thought about that, but as you mentioned that, I know a guy who was a pastor of maybe 400 people, and he was arrested on solicitation and prostitution.
Yeah.
And it didn't make the news.
No. I mean, it did on the very back page of the, wherever they put that in the newspaper.
Right.
Anybody reads newspapers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, you got somebody who is suspected of something.
Yeah.
But he's got 10,000 members.
All over.
Suspected.
It could be
everywhere.
Yep.
It's like, the court of opinion has already won. He's not even,
the rest of his life, that's following him.
It's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good thoughts.
Yeah. You have megachurches in the Bible.
Yeah.
Like Jerusalem's massive. I mean, what'd you get, Pentecost? 3,000 men?
Yeah.
And then Solomon's portico, 5,000 men? That's just men.
Yeah.
My guess is the ladies are there at least equally.
Yeah.
And then now what do you have? I mean, you got a ginormous church in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And until the book shifts in Acts 13 to Antioch, this is how God's working through this massive church in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Guys are going out from there, they're coming into there, and it's not until Acts 13 we shift to Antioch that now Antioch becomes the hub of Paul's missionary journeys and the story of the gospel penetrating the ancient world.
That's good.
And so I don't know how you can, megachurches aren't the problem.
Yeah.
They actually do a tremendous amount of good. Like the ones I know that are involved at high levels in social issues, they have schools, they do profound work among the poor, overseas. You get that collection of people, you can do a lot of really good stuff, and most of them are doing those things. It's just kind of current cynicism that has us singling them out.
Oh, that's really good. All right, we're throwing you underwater now.
Let's go.
All right, so I got a few questions here, and I just want to, will you sink or swim? I don't know.
We'll go back to find out.
Yeah, we're gonna see. All right. So, first one off the top is, what do you do in your free time that would surprise people? BJJ, I think that's surprising some, but maybe not others.
Yeah.
But
so I think the two things that replenish my soul.
Okay.
We talk about it like that.
All right.
I love to do jiu-jitsu, which is that's newer, 2.5 years I've been training. And then, man, I love a good stalk hunt. I want to get in a blind. I want to earn it.
Really?
And so I want it to be awful until it's over.
Okay.
And then it'll be awesome. So I got my first bull elk this past year. Hiked up in the mountains, got to knock one of those down. Went for a couple of years, never saw one. Finally got on one this year. It was amazing and awful.
Wow.
Awful to go out there and get him. Awful to quarter him and pack him out.
I gotta go
I've
hunting.
been eating good, bro.
I've never gone hunting. Well, I went once.
Go with AT?
Yes.
Yeah, I was
I
about to
sat in the tree
say,
forever and nothing happened. Nothing happened.
You should come up to Colorado like Matt did and get elk from our state.
You gotta go earn it, man.
The one time I attempted to kill animals when I was with you in Sudan, and the knife was too dull, and it was abuse at that point.
What my knife?
Yeah.
What my knife for the beamer seat? Like my knife's sharp.
Okay.
Yeah. They wanted to honor us with that.
That's what I'm saying, man. That was a rough one.
It was rough.
But I definitely got to go with you one.
We'll make that happen. We probably won't, but it's fun to talk about what it'd be like.
No, we're gonna do
No,
it.
we're
Man.
gonna-
Let's do it.
I'm gonna look at
I've
AT.
never
We'll
done
find a spot. All right.
I've never done
Can you
it
shoot though?
before.
I can't
Yeah,
shoot. I don't want you to.
Let me tell you something.
Gut some
Let me tell you
poor
something.
animal.
After the pandemic, I thought the purge was coming. Okay, I was at gun practice on a regular basis. I was at the range. The purge is coming. I'm being prepared for this. Okay, all right. What would you say? Like, I mean, obviously, over 20 some years in ministry.
Yeah.
What do you look back on and say, man, I wish I would have done this different?
Gosh, there's a couple of things. If I'm just talking organizationally, I think, man, I really missed the importance of student ministry early on. The church when you guys were there, there weren't any teenagers. It was a bunch of 20-year-olds. And then as we grew, I just didn't see it, man. I just didn't see it. And so I still feel like for a church our size, I don't love where we are in student ministry. We're making strides, we're fixing it. But I look back and wonder about the missed opportunity of kids that we could have really pointed towards the Lord. So I think about that oftentimes. I think I knew when when I came into the village, I knew more about what I didn't want to be than what I wanted to be. So I'd looked at other places and it wasn't going to be like that. But I didn't have this vision that God had given me that was pulling me forward. And that made me make some mistakes and build some things in place that to this day I regret. So
it's good. Wow.
Start a Christian school. Start a classical Christian school tomorrow. Start 10 of them. You probably have the resources to do so. It'd be great.
This thing that you've encountered on a mission trip, demonic activity, I don't know, but just you're out there and you're like, what the heck?
Yeah, actually, this happened to me. This is so old now. I told the story a bunch, but 98 had gone into India, and there was a guy on my team named Richard's what we called him. I don't think that was his name, but Richard's what we called him. He told us his name, like, call me Richard. Richard it is. I'm not gonna do that to your birth name. And he walked in a kind of supernatural power that was new to me. I got saved at a church that was like 3 weeks on why the gift of tongues doesn't exist. I mean, that's how I got that. That was the stream I was in. And we were doing these like forums of American life at college campuses in India. And basically, there's a business guy talking about capitalism. There was a culture guy talking, and I was doing religion, and I would just preach the gospel. So I studied, man, like so much to be able to answer any question a Hindu might ask me. And I would, after it was over, a line would form, and people would come up and be like, hey, could Jesus just be another apparition of Krishna? Ready for it? Great question. Not a chance. Let me tell you why. And then Richard would occasionally, not with everyone, he would occasionally just go lean forward and be like, I think the Lord's telling me that your mother will be okay. And that person would break down, start crying, and they would just walk off with Richard. They'd come back, that dude would be saved. And I'm just like, my apologetics aren't working quite like whatever this is. And that's a turning point in my life to watch like real prophetic ministry play out before my eyes in a way that I know. He doesn't know them. We met in Hong Kong. He's from Sudan, Southern Sudan. And man, he just read people's mail. I started getting nervous. What's he seeing? What's he seeing about me? Confessing sin to the Lord. So he was just a guy that knew things about, dozens and dozens of people that when he said it, their whole countenance changed. And many of them actually came to come know and trust Jesus. I wish I had a cooler story of like death to life, like resurrected someone from the grave or something like that. But that was, I think for me, that just rocked a theological assumption I had because of where I was saved and had been discipled. Because that wasn't demonic. And that wasn't like placing someone in the crowd. That wasn't, and people got saved. And it sent me kind of in a bit of a tailspin theologically. What do I do with this?
Wow.
And all I'd seen is kind of the crazy stuff online. I hadn't seen it work like that.
That's crazy.
And so yeah, that's at 98 in India.
That's pretty wild. I heard you preach a lot of sermons. And some of them you said you had to stop telling jokes so much because you're like, wait, maybe I'm being too much of a comedian and I want to make sure the message is clear. But do you have in your mind like the worst sermon you've ever preached? Do you feel like, oh, I know this one? Oh my gosh, it's terrible. Yeah, no, not really. I mean, I've got massive mistakes that I've made and things I said from stage that I think I'd recover from or the crowd would recover from. But here's what I learned about that. There are times where I thought it was the worst sermon ever and the Lord used it beyond my imagination. And then there are times, Craig, I thought I was killing it. Nope. Nope. So I haven't, there's audio that a former staff member got. He didn't get fired because of this. He's just literally working at another church now. But he found my first sermon ever. First of all, I sound like I'm Matthew McConaughey or something. I had some sort of Southern, I don't know how I grew out of that, but bro, and it's pretty terrible. Yeah, it's pretty terrible. Yikes. But what's funny about that sermon is I remember preaching it and it was powering me. The Holy Spirit worked in a crazy way that night. It was one of those kind of many little things the Lord did to kind of turn me in the direction that I'm in now. But I'll show you a video clip of something that'll never be public after we get off this. Okay, I gotta see that. This is my last one. Honestly, I probably know your answer, but I'm just curious for people out there. Like, you're in a season now of, kind of elder wisdom. You've been doing it for a long time. But there was a season when you were younger and you were on a rocket ship. And I mean, everywhere. And people were looking for you to be the go-to guy. What did you feel about that season? How did you, what, did you want it? Did you not want it? It was a different day. So having it wouldn't mean what it means now. Right. I'm sure there was a part of me that did, but I wanted to coach my kids' teams. I want to be home, man. I wanted to not miss it. I mean, my oldest is married now. My son just graduated high school, and sweet Nora's 15 going into her sophomore year. And man, I just didn't. And this is where, even as a young man, I was able to hear that this stuff will always be here, but my kids might not necessarily always be here. And so we made a real cognitive decision. And I had a lot of people in my ear tell me it was the wrong decision. But I don't have any regrets about that. I mean, I intentionally cleared my schedule, traveled so much less, stopped writing for a big block. I coached my son's football teams and went to my daughter's races, and I got not a single regret about that. That's good, man. Listen, we appreciate your candor, your voice. Overcomer, come on, book. I hope it's helpful. Yeah, make sure people go support. I'm excited to check that out. As a matter of fact, and I don't read books that much. Listen, I read it. It's the only book I've ever written that I read. Okay, I read it. All right. Yeah, I mean, I will like listen to some books. Yeah, but they have to be highly recommended because I'm like, listen, our attention span. Listen, Ecclesiastes says it, bro. Yeah, to the end of reading is wearying. I mean, it's just so many books to read. It's just wearying, man. But what you have said, I think, is very necessary for the season that we're in. I think so, especially going into the fall. Yeah, so I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that. But outside of that, man, thank you. Thank you for the years of consistency. Thank you for being just a human. Come on.
All right, that's enough of that. Yeah, so there's some thoughts I have on that conversation. Some were, more acerbic than others. Some good stuff in here. They talk about being deep. I don't buy it as deep. And I'm not doing that to tear down these two men. They talk about reading and what are they're reading into you, right? And Michael Bird on politics. I mean, that's a joke. That's a joke. And so, yeah, that's a review. I've never done a review before. Let me know what you think in the comments. What did I miss? What do you agree with that I highlighted? Maybe you disagree. Happy to hear from you. I'd like the church. You're not going to move forward without guys in America, without mega churches. You can wish mega churches would die and go away and they're all bad. I guess you could wish that, but there's so many in America that unless leaders like Chandler It'll be interesting to see what he says in the politics series. But unless leaders like Chandler embrace reality and come to terms with what's going on politically, it's going to continue to be mealy-mouthed third-wayisms all the way. And they think that's the only way. They think that's the gospel way. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed the episode. Support the show. Go to the Patreon in the show notes. Sign up. You can tell me to do more of these. You can tell me to do less of those in the Patreon. That'd be great. I'd love to hear from you. Sign up there, $5 a month, $15 a month. Support the show. Help me bring great content to you. And we'll see you next time.